10 miles away from where I lived, I was in Beaufort, Georgia at First Methodist Church as the student pastor. 10 miles away in Cumming, Georgia, there was a ruckus that occurred when a young man just wanted to honor Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And he had a march in downtown Cumming, Georgia in Forsyth County. Little did he know that people would come out and protest and throw rocks and bottles and all kinds of terrible things at him and hit him in the face, and he was bleeding. And so he called Hosea Williams, and Coretta Scott King is Hosea Williams' friend, and said, we need to do something. So that next weekend, they planned a march. And I thought, well, this is in my backyard. Do you realize that this was 1987? Just a few years ago for some of us. The students at Beaufort High School, the African-American females on the basketball team, when you would go through Interstate 20 through Cumming, Georgia, the female basketball players, the African-Americans, would dive down in the seat when we went through Forsyth County on their way to play another team. They didn't want to be seen as being in the bus because a lynching occurred on the courthouse lawn back in the 1930s, and their parents and grandparents continued to tell them of what had taken place in Forsyth County, and they didn't want to be seen in Forsyth County. This was real. It was palatable. And I'd heard these stories since I was their youth pastor and been there just a year or so. And so I decided to march. In that march, I decided to go. And so the senior pastor and I went. And as soon as a few leaders in the church found out we were doing it, our jobs were threatened. People called and left all kinds of horrible voicemails on my answering machine. But he and I went on to march anyway. And as we were going through the crowd, we were heading down towards, we were parked in an area, we're heading down towards the hill, down to where the march was to assemble. And as we were walking through this parking lot, all of a sudden we saw a bunch of trunks open up and popping open. And we saw people getting out and taking off their jackets. And remember, it was January, still kind of cool. And some people putting on white robes. And I thought, oh, we're going to have a choir. There's going to be some choir singing. And they had white robes, but it wasn't a choir. And all of a sudden, they started putting hoods on. And because I'd had the theology of Martin Luther King Jr. class the semester before, I recognized one of the hoods. It was the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And as we were walking through, a couple of them yelled out, "Where are you going? Where are you going?" I said, "Well, we're going down to join the march." And people stared, and a couple of them spoke some explicatives. And I don't know what it was, but I kept looking back up at the hill. I kept looking at the eyes of those who were putting on white robes and hoods. And when I got down to the bottom, there were state troopers everywhere. The National Guardsmen had been called out, not just in Georgia, but some folks came over from other places. And officers of the law all throughout the state of Georgia were there. There was 20,000 of us in that march, but there had to have been 8,000 or 10,000 officers, troopers, other people sworn to uphold the law. As I was standing there in line, something just overcame me. It was a question I couldn't shake. If Jesus was here right now, where would he be? Would he be here in the line with me protesting that a despicable thing happened the week before, that when somebody had the freedom to just honor somebody else, that they were pelted with rocks and bottles to the point that it made their face bleed? And would he be in this crowd? And then I looked up on the hill, and I saw anger and rage in the eyes of people who were looking through hoodies. And then I thought about Luke chapter 15. I just couldn't shake it. And Jesus ate with the sinners and the tax collectors. And as he was eating with the sinners and the tax collectors, the scribes and the Pharisees began to murmur, saying, "Look, he even eats with such scum." And Jesus, overhearing their comments, says, "What man among you who, having 100 sheep, would not leave the 99 and go after the one who was lost And upon finding it, he would rejoice and put it upon his shoulder. And he would come back and say to his friends and his family, come and rejoice, for the sheep that I've lost, I've now found.